Brazil's state-controlled giant Petrobras has big oil exploration plans for the so-called Equatorial Margin, which is off the coast of the Amazon basin and the northeast of Brazil, but that means drilling at the mouth of the Amazon River. Now, this comes as a contradiction to the government's pro environment attitude and could result in Environment Minister Marina Silva leaving the government within the next few weeks or months. That's what we'll discuss in Brazil this week. Today I'm joined by Deputy Editor Ewan Marshall, who covers environmental issues. Hi, Ewan, how are you doing?
Hi, Gustavo.
So, before we get into the oil versus the Amazon issue that we're seeing within the Lula coalition, I'd just like to remind our viewers to subscribe to the Brazilian Report, which is the journalistic engine that fuels all of our content from our articles, newsletters, podcasts, and yes, also YouTube broadcasts. So you can go to brazilian.report/subscribe and find a subscription tier that fits your budget and your needs. And if you are already subscribed, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report and just tip us a cup of coffee every now and then, or have a monthly commitment to helping our newsroom grow larger and stronger. So, Ewan, what's going on off the coast of the Amazon? Can you explain to us what is the so-called equatorial margin? Why is it important, and why it is being this major source of headache for Lula, for Marina Silva, and for Petrobras?
Well, the equatorial margin in itself it's a region of the coast of South America. It's just off Brazil's north and northeastern coast. It also covers into Guyana and Suriname as well. That kind of northern part of South America. And studies have kind of shown that there's quite possibly a lot of oil there in deep sea fields, and so that makes it one of these really kind of promising areas in the globe right now for kind of oil exploration. And Brazil's state-controlled oil giant Petrobras is obviously not going to want to kind of stay out of that. It's very much the bread and butter of Petrobras. Obviously, we had they discovered and drilled the pre-salt oil reserves some decades ago. So now this was kind of the new kind of oil hope for Petrobras. They declared not earlier this month, actually early in March, that they were going to place quite a significant priority on kind of studies and drilling and exploration in the equatorial margin. But the problem with it is, as you mentioned there at the top, this is an area which is just off of the coast of like the Brazilian states of like Amapá and Pará. So they are mainly covered in the Amazon rainforest. And also the equatorial margin also takes into account the mouth of the Amazon River, like the Amazon estuary. And these are areas which are environmentally very important. The vast majority of Brazil's mangroves are there, just off that coast. So, it's definitely...
And you have also indigenous lands there, right? That could be affected by oil drilling.
Yeah, and on these, just off the coast, of of Brazil's northern coast, the kind of the oil fields, the oil wells that they're intending to drill in are really not that far from the coast. There is quite a special national park there, the Cabo Orange National Park in Amapá, which is a protected area, and there are indigenous communities living nearby. So the whole idea of drilling oil there, it's there could be there's definitely a chance for something to go wrong. And so that's why the kind of environmentalists and the Environment Ministry in the Lula government have been steadily against it from the start.
And 1 week ago, IBAMA, which is Brazil's environmental protection agency, denied a permit for exploration wells to be drilled in that region. And Lula was in Japan during the G7 summit, and he actually tiptoed on the issue. He was like, if it's going to hurt the Amazon, of course we won't do it, but I doubt it will hurt the Amazon because it's like 350 kilometers off the coast, so it's safe. But I mean, of course, there is no such thing as 100% safe oil exploration, right? Even Petrobras, a recent survey by a recent study by Fiquem Sabendo, which is a transparency organization, shows that just in 2023, Petrobras has received almost 300 fines for environmental transgression. So it's not as if there were absolutely no risks, right?
Of course, yeah. And so the explanation that Lola gave, saying that he actually said it was over 500 kilometers from the mouth of the Amazon, which is true to a certain extent, as in the oil well that they want to drill in is, I think it's around 530 kilometers from where you would call, the real mouth of the Amazon River, but it's like less than 200 kilometers from parts of the Amazon rainforest. It's quite, it is a very kind of environmentally vulnerable and important area. That, yeah, definitely, as you said, there are risks, and that's why IBAMA were not very happy with the studies that Petrobras put forward and the request to explore oil in that area, and so yeah, they denied permission.
And one thing is funny because this whole thing reminded me of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who ran on an environmentalist platform. And then once major reserves in Alberta were discovered, he's like, "Wow, you must be crazy to have that much oil and not tap into that." And we're pretty much seeing the same thing, right? Lula, prior to the campaign, he drew Marina Silva to his coalition, made a lot of environmental pledges, promised to end deforestation by the end of the decade, to make Brazil's energy matrix carbon neutral. But now he's just drooling for that oil, that massive oil that the government believes could make Brazil the world's fourth highest oil producer in the world.
Well, I think that's one of the big questions, I think, with the Lula government, because during the campaign, I think definitely because one of the big kind of preoccupations of the Lula campaign was to show that, he had a kind of positive international image, that people liked Lula around the world and people maybe didn't like Jair Bolsonaro around the world. And one of the key parts of that was his kind of environmental agenda, showing that, he would bring Marina Silva, respected around the world. He would bring her in as environmental minister. He would make all these promises for deforestation. But I think that either we didn't see it at the time, or we did see it and we were kind of pretending that we didn't. The priority for the Lula government for this first year, at least for this first couple of years, is economic growth. That is what has to be the main priority for the Lula government, and it's quite obvious what that is. And that, we're seeing that he's quite quickly willing to kind of go against those environment promises that we were seeing. I mean, you suggest that you're going to have zero deforestation by 2030. You suggest that the energy matrix is going to be carbon neutral, but you're bigging up drilling for oil in the Amazon, and you're putting out, measures for kind of cheaper cars for Brazilian families. It doesn't really add up, does it?
Yeah, no, and it's funny because you're mentioned that either people just wanted to believe or they didn't notice the real priorities. And I remember in the international press a lot of articles saying like the future of the planet hinges on the Brazilian election. And I mean, it shows that there are much more nuance to these kind of statements. But this issue, I mean, it doesn't come without a political cost for Marina Silva, right? Because now she's being bombarded from within the government. The Mines and Energy Minister, Alexandre Silveira, has been quite vocal in his criticism towards Marina Silva, towards the Environmental Protection Agency. And he wants Brazil to explore that oil potential. We are seeing a lot of stories popping up in the Brazilian press saying that Lula felt, quote, betrayed by what happened, by the denial of permits, and we are seeing this pressure mount around her, and a lot of people. And you and I append an article that we published today, May 25th, on the Brazilian Report, saying that this could precipitate a process that ultimately leads to Marina Silva being jettisoned from the cabinet, right?
Yeah, I mean, and she did cut ties with Lola and his Workers' Party. The first time that she was environment minister, she was environment minister under Lola until 2008, during Lola's first two terms. And she resigned as environment minister, and she, cut all ties. She fell out with the Workers' Party, and she left the Workers' Party. She was a member. For various reasons, one of them being the construction of the Belo Monte hydroelectric dam complex, which she actually compared drilling at the mouth of the Amazon to the Belo Monte project earlier this year. She said that it would be like a torture similar to how Belo Monte was, and also for another one of the main reasons she left was that her deforestation, her Amazon deforestation policy was just being slowly dismantled by the Lula government, and so she felt she was being undermined. At least that's what that's what she says about the topic. And it seems that just now, all of these elements are still present. I mean, not only is the government apparently pushing for a environmentally destructive and quite significant public project, in terms of Petrobras drilling for oil at the mouth of the Amazon, but as well she's kind of being undermined. We're having the mines, as you said, the mining minister, saying that he's going to do everything he can to make sure they do that. We've got Lola in Japan saying that, I don't think it would make, I don't think it would cause any damage. It doesn't really look good.
No, and it gets worse, right? Because I remember you interviewed her for the Brazilian Report a couple of years ago, and she said she left the Lula government because she didn't want to be a decor, just
figure.
there for the image. Exactly. And actually, Congress is determined to turn her into this sort of decorative figure, right? Because at the same time that we are seeing this internal feud within the administration, Amazon versus oil, we are seeing the rural caucus in the House, actually in Congress in general, trying to undermine the environment ministry altogether. So a little bit into the weeds of how the Brazilian government works, but a president can only change the cabinet if it means not creating nor suppressing any government body or increasing public spending. If there are changes to an agency that will begin to exist or cease to exist, then it has to go through legislation. So what they do is a provisional decree. It has immediate effect, but must be validated by Congress, and Congress has the right to modify this kind of decrees. And what Congress is doing actually is trying to modify one of Lula's initial provisional decrees that he issued on January the 1st, his first day in office, that set the very structure of the government, right, Ewan?
Yeah, these decrees, when they happen, as you mentioned, it's if you want to create a ministry, or if you want to move an agency from one place to the other, if you want to extinguish an agency or a ministry, cabinet ministry, you have to put out one of these decrees. And usually, there's never really any problem with it. You set out what you want your cabinet to look like. You set out, any changes in terms of government agencies will be under which umbrella. And Congress usually goes along with you and allows you to do that. But it's
a non-issue, right? It's your government,
exactly, yeah.
It's your administration.
But what we've got at the moment is the report, which has been submitted in Congress, and the government ended up agreeing with this report as part of a political negotiation. It takes away a lot of powers and responsibilities of Marina Silva's environment ministry. Now the National Water Agency would now be under the Regional Development Ministry. So that gets taken away from the Environment Ministry. The database of the environmental control of rural properties, they call the CAR or the CAR, that is going to go to the Management Ministry, and also the control over the national waste management systems that would be moved to the Cities Ministry. So, it's just a bunch of these powers, these responsibilities that Marina Silva and the Environment Ministry expected to have when they took office, but now are being kind of taken away from them. It's just another example of kind of her and her ministry
Yeah.
being undermined, really.
And which make the backbone of the policies she sees for the environment ministry, like waste management and rural properties, which, because in Brazil, agriculture and cattle ranching are the key drivers of deforestation. So for her to implement an anti-deforestation plan, she must have control over that. And I mean, other ministries, because Lula has this huge tent in which many hardcore conservatives are under, we still see a big influence from agricultural lobbies in places like the agriculture ministry. I'm sorry. So it's not as if the whole government was looking at walking towards the same direction, and it would be just semantics to say this is under X or Y ministry. Like, it really matters if managing rural properties is under Marina Silva or under the agriculture
Yeah,
ministry,
and,
right?
and the biggest example of this, which is not strictly under Marina Silva's ministry, but is really connected to the work that they do in the Environment Ministry, is that the power and the rights to demarcate Indigenous lands by this proposal, by this report which has been put forward, would be taken away from the Indigenous Peoples Ministry, which is a new ministry. It was one of Lula's promises that he was going to set up an Indigenous Peoples Ministry that was going to have the power to demarcate Indigenous lands, was going to control all of that. This proposal would take that away from the new ministry and hand it over to the Justice Ministry, which it's a problem. I know it's under the same government, but it's a completely different way of doing things. It's not what Lula promised, and yeah,
And the symbolic way of having, if you're having an indigenous people's ministry and it doesn't actually control anything related to indigenous lands, I mean,
yeah,
why have one in the first place?
exactly.
And I mean, it all boils down to this government's inability to build a coalition, which part of the problem is the Congress is deeply conservative, especially if we compare it to 20 years ago when Lula stepped into office for the first time. But also, the government has fumbled the ball, right? I mean, for a political group that won 4 presidential elections and stayed in power for so long, like 13 years, I mean, it's really baffling to me how many screw ups we have seen in this first 5 months, right?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps there was a belief that, I mean, this is just conjecture, kind of personal opinion, but perhaps there was a belief that maybe there would have been a kind of a honeymoon period, that things would have been a little bit easier, they would have been cut a bit more slack by Congress and the Brazilian public, I suppose, in the first 6 months at least, which has definitely not happened. They won that election by a tight margin. We all know that. And
And 1 week into office, we had a putschist revolt in Brasilia. So, yeah, I mean, 6 days of honeymoon, that's it.
yeah, and it's been really quite hard for them to, every single vote, every single thing that they have to approve has been a huge struggle. I mean, the major kind of agenda point that they've been working on for the first 6 months has been this new fiscal framework for Brazil. And to be able to approve that, I mean, we saw it making advancements yesterday in Congress. But to be able to approve that, we also saw all of these other real backward steps in regards to the Environment Ministry and things like that, all happening at the same time. So it seems like the cost for the government to approve anything is really, really quite high at the moment.
Yeah, and the problem is the government doesn't seem to realize that. And it acts as if it had way more power than it really has. And the risk is vexing congressional leaders to the point that one, the government really realizes that it must surrender a lot of power to Congress, then the price is going to be even higher, which is pretty much what happened with Jair Bolsonaro, because at one point he practically handed over the keys to his government to congressional leaders.
Well, yeah, I think this is probably the real takeaway from this. I think at the moment, the story has been, the kind of the shock that this kind of dismantlement or potential dismantling of the Environment Ministry is happening so soon and under a Lula government. But probably the real story to this is the role of the legislature in power in Brazil, and how to govern in Brazil. Because I don't think before Bolsonaro, I don't think we really saw anything like this. The kind of this overarching power of Congress, and there seems to be a self-knowledge in Congress that they have this power, and they're not going to be willing to give it away anytime soon. So I think that is what's going to probably define the next decades in Brazil, rather than maybe Lula reneging on some environmental promises.
Yes, no, and to understand the ins and outs of these political struggles, I highly recommend our viewers to subscribe to the Brazilian Report, because you're going to have fresh content on Brazilian politics, the environment, economics. I mean, you name it, every day, new content, original content. And you can also have our analysis or stories directly in your inbox. Subscribe to one of our newsletters, which just last week won the prize of best newsletter service in the Americas for small or local newsrooms by the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers. So go to Brazilian.report/subscribe. If you have already subscribed, you can go to buymeacoffee.com and give a little more support for us. We have this QR code on the right bottom corner of your screen, and you just flash it and you'll be taken to our Buy Me a Coffee page. If you have a fixed monthly membership, you're going to have a lot of different original content, exclusive content, like how we do our journalism and interesting things about Brazilian culture. So go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report for more content outside of our political and economic analysis. Ewan, thank you very much. Always a pleasure. And I know you're going to stay on this story, and we're going to have much more to report on.
Yeah. Thanks, Gustavo. Speak to you again soon.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.